I was recording. All right, there we go. All right, nice to meet you.
Yes, my pleasure indeed, Hal.
All right, Ken, can you hear us as we talk?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear.
Okay, great. All right, so we've got basically a residential home with about 10 residents in it at any given time, 8 to 10. And then we've got at least 2 people working on something called the Bredesen protocol with a Mind for All Seasons, or their version of it's called the Enhanced protocol. It sounds like you've worked with Eric before.
Eric who?
Colette.
That doesn't
He
ring
said
a
he's
bell.
talked to you. Okay,
He's
they've
may
got a
have talked to
company in
me.
Idaho.
I've talked to just hundreds and hundreds of people.
Okay.
Oh, yes, Eric, yeah, from the All Seasons place. Or no,
Yes, exactly.
yeah.
Okay, so he recommended us get a device. So I bought one, and also Ken bought one for his wife. And if we can get it working well, I'd love to buy more of them because I have 3 other homes that have people in Alzheimer's as well,
Okay.
and dementia.
No, I can't say if I know what all the causes of Alzheimer's are. There might be a few causes, but the one that we're seeing, and it probably shows up more in early onset Alzheimer's. Our guess is that after the condition occurs, you probably get the Alzheimer's in about 10 years. And this post inflammatory condition shuts down the loop to the thalamus. So people lose their alpha waves, and they lose their ability to make big delta waves with sleep spindles. So behaviorally, it's characterized by constant anxiety, brain fog, severe insomnia, and obsessive compulsiveness that's often very strong. I've now looked at hoarders, counters, cutters, ritualists, door closers, and anorexics, and they all have the same signature. And
Okay.
there can be a natural form of OCD, but this is all what's called low voltage fast. And it's not really fast. It only appears to be fast because everything else is gone. The alpha waves are gone, and theta waves are basically gone, and delta wave, and so there's not much left to see except low voltage, choppy, little flatlined EEG. And I sent you the link to my video, and I show several cases in my video. But what happens is, in this case, is that, and you'll also see it in the Alzheimer's article that I sent you as well. What happens is they can't make the alpha wave, and they can't sleep, and they have constant anxiety. And in the brain, there's a system called the glymphatic system, or glia lymphatic, so they call it glymphatic. And it activates astrocytes. And the astrocytes activate from large voltage delta waves, which in this condition the brain cannot make. And when it gets these large delta waves of the sleep spindles, it will activate and it will clean out the proteins that build up during the day and flush them into the arteries and the veins, into the lymphatic system, and flush them out. What happens is these guys can't make these large voltage waves, and the astrocytes don't activate. The brain fills up with protein. And I've been researching this for a long, long time before we started making this connection with Alzheimer's. But we've treated a few people on our own with Alzheimer's, and Leslie Sherlin and Tom Budzinski's published the case study that was done. And at the time when they did the study, we just knew that the gear worked, but we didn't know why it worked, what was going on. It took me another 15 years to figure it out. And around 2015 is when I figured it all out, 16 maybe. But anyway, then I went back into all their EEG recordings and discovered that this lady was not making alpha waves. She could not make them. And that's what we call a thalamocortical disconnect, because the thalamus and the cortex, which is the skin of your brain, they make this loop, and this loop is typically the alpha rhythm, and it gets gated off. I've been doing DC recordings and such, trying to see if I can find a voltage, like some kind of a potential on the scalp. I have certainly seen very high scalp potentials with slowed activity, But it's so difficult trying to make a DC recording. And I've not yet been able to show if there is a scalp, like a big DC scalp potential, like to do with metabolites being off or galvanic action going on. But it does appear that as the voltage goes up, and we're talking millivolts, not microvolts, as it goes up, the brain gets slower and slower. And I've got some documented cases of that. And we think that there's a point where lactate, ATP, and other things get shifted around in the brain to such a degree that the voltage builds up enough between the cortex and the thalamus in that gradient that it gates the thalamus off, kind of like a squelch does on a walkie-talkie or on, something like that on a radio, and then it stops the communication. In a lot of people, we will see just parts of the brain are shut down, but in a lot of them, we see the entire brain is shut down. There's not an alpha rhythm to be found anywhere in the brain. And what we've seen so far is that it does seem that over time, it probably turns into Alzheimer's, is what we're speculating. We don't have hardcore proof on it yet. But if you see these other symptoms in people, maybe they had a fall, maybe they had a viral infection that with quite a severe fever, that it's called a subfebrile fever. So during let's say a viral infection, they may have had a pretty nasty fever, maybe even seizures in some cases. They may have had that for a week or two, but then unknown to them in a way, they may have had a low-grade fever for a few months that followed. Because most of the time, whether it's a concussion or whether it's an infection, they get pretty normal for a few months, then they start to get worse again. And that's quite common with brain injuries, like say concussive type injuries, even if there's not really a concussion, but a shaken head that leads to neuroinflammation, is that 3 weeks later or so they go back to work and they're pretty functional, maybe not perfect, but fairly functional. But then 2 months go by and they're not functioning very well, and 3 months go by, they're unemployable. And that seems to be the condition. So check that into their histories, and also see if they've got the classic symptoms: constant anxiety disorder, severe insomnia, and obsessive compulsiveness. So they're your hoarders, counters, cutters, ritualists, door closers, anorexics. They're the people who fuss about everything. If the cutlery isn't straight on their napkin, or on their table, they will straighten the cutlery. If a dish is crooked in the cupboard, they will straighten the dish. And they waste all kinds of energy fussing over silly little things, and that they have no good reason to do. And that's a classic symptom of every single person. And in my lecture, you'll see the brain map, and every single person shows a signature down the middle of their head where the cingulate gyrus is. And every single one's got it.
Okay, I don't know if our guys have. I've seen that in the past, definitely. I don't think the current ones we've got that we're working with have that to the big extent, but I'm sure that they can't remember things. One lady in particular, it's like Groundhog Day every day. She goes sort of through the same routine at different times of the day.
Sure.
Things like that.
There can be other things that could help too, like you can have mitochondria problems in the brain where the mitochondria are shutting down and the neurons simply cannot make energy. And if that's the case, there are systems that are photobiomodulation systems, and they utilize red and near-infrared light. And you literally wear a cap on your head, and it can really help get the brain running again. From a mitochondria perspective, it's used also a fair bit with concussion and people with cognitive decline and dementias and stuff like this.
Okay.
I get you the info on that stuff if you're interested in that as well.
That's
but certainly the
great.
entrainment will help with a lot of other things. I sent you our seniors study, and also I got a lecture on cognition, and I have a seniors component in that lecture. It's probably a little more up to date than what's in the my article that I wrote some years ago. But basically, it calms people down really well. Seniors, like just with general cognitive decline. We used a study on 80 seniors in a couple of homes in Alberta here with a psychology student did the study for us, and they all had depression and high risk of falling. And they used the Tinetti balance measure, and they also did a depression measure on the geriatric depression scale. And in the course of 4 weeks, 100% of them were they qualified as non-depressed in 4 weeks, and their balance mean score had improved enough that they were not considered risk of falling on the Tinetti balance score, and their gait improved at 8 weeks. And then another study done by Chris Palmquist. She was a doctoral student out of Saybrook. Hers was done, I think, 2016 or so. And she actually did EEGs on the seniors, and as we age, our alpha waves slow down, alpha rhythms slow down. And so she showed that the alpha rhythm picked up in frequency roughly equivalent to someone 10 to 15 degrees younger.
Okay.
And also did some memory tests and found that certainly short-term and I think it was immediate and short-term memory had improved significantly.
Great.
So we've got that. And then Tom Budzinski's studies out of the seniors home, he found that actually that across the board, he used the microcog. It's a continuous performance test. It's a time test on the computer. And he found that there were improvements across the board on all the measures that were made, but particularly spatial ability improved a great deal. And spatial ability is also tied in with falling and stuff like this when people have trouble seeing their world in 3 dimensions, and then they make errors when they're walking and stuff like this.
Sure.
So there's at least 3 studies on it. I think there's a 4th one that I probably forgot about. And they're all in that article that I just sent you.
Great.
And I think they're all in the article. And also in the video, if you watch the video, I have the senior stuff near the end of the video. The video is 94 minutes long. And I really get into all the physiology stuff in the first half an hour. Then I start getting into these different cases, different people who got concussed for different reasons. One girl who became anorexic after a flu, and showed just how well entrainment worked for them. But after all the cases, I show, I get into the whole lymphatic system and how that shutdown can turn into Alzheimer's. We think MS, like multiple sclerosis, is probably also a spin-off of that signature. And the reason being is that insomnia is a primary, of course, symptom of this condition. And most people with MS have had a condition of insomnia for years prior to developing symptoms of MS. So they probably too had the shutdown in their brain. The thalamocortical loop was shut down. But another thing is that the oligodendrocytes, which myelinate the brain, they must see action potential so they know where to go. And if they don't see action potentials, they just quit myelinating. And after time, the myelination starts to slowly disintegrate off all the axons of all the neurons and stuff. And so it looks like if your brain fills up with proteins before it loses its myelination, then you're Alzheimer's. If it loses its myelination before it fills up with proteins, you might be diagnosed as MS.
Huh.
And that's the theory we're working on anyway at the moment.
Okay. So we got the device in our home. We know these ladies have Alzheimer's or some form of dementia. Eric gave me sort of a rundown of how to use it, but it wasn't like, it was the basics. And so I know you have a bunch of different protocols and programs. I don't know, Ken, if you have it there, which one we used, but it was the one with the guy meditating. And it was
for most of them, you're going to want to use either the happy face, that's the mood booster, either 1 or 2. Now, if people seem to have a hypothalamic condition, and are you going to test for that? If they have hypertension for no good reason,
okay,
if they have fibromyalgia, I think third of people with fibromyalgia have a hypothalamic condition. They respond well to the sub-delta session, which is, we discovered that by accident. It's a very slow session. The lights are only flashing like half to 1 flash per second. It's very slow, but we've had some good success in the population that it fits. Most of the time, otherwise, though, you're going to be using either number 1 or number 2 in the happy face side, the mood boosters.
Okay.
And you're going to use a lot of number 2 or number 3 or even number 4 in the brain booster section.
Which is
and
which
you have
one?
to experiment some. Typically on the brain booster, I would probably put most people on probably number 3 as a starting point.
Okay.
Yeah, which
And
one?
then experiment with 2 and 4, and also with the mood booster. If they have depression in their signature, then you need to get them on the mood booster. And alternate back and forth is usually what I do. I'll alternate back and forth if they show depression.
All right.
And
So
not only does that boost. Go ahead.
I don't
Sorry.
have the device in front of me. Ken, do you have it there, or do you have the instruction? It's in the on the sort of bookshelf in that front hall.
Okay. Yeah, the brain booster sessions are basically SMR beta sessions. So we have the sensory motor rhythm, 12 to 15 flashes per second for the right brain. So it's on the left side for the right brain. And then we run around 20 hertz on the right stim for the left brain. And we've used it on, we've got studies on it from everything from ADHD to college students improving grade point average, seniors. We use it for all concussion people. And that same kind of collection of protocols is used across the board on so many conditions. It's almost huge. It's the most popular protocols we use. When we got into this, we were all focused on trying to relax people, and we were using alpha. And that was our big thing. Alpha was a big thing back in the 80s. And then as we kept discovering more and more and more, so many people who have anxiety don't need alpha. They need to be stimulated because their brain is shut down. It's not actually over revved, or it doesn't have too much gas. What it's lacking are brakes. And it's lacking brakes because it's functioning so poorly that sort of the brake guy doesn't even turn on. And that's how ADHD works. In ADHD, the frontal lobes are so full of theta activity that the frontal lobes don't really wake up. So the brake and 70% of frontal lobe functioning, where all our executive decisions come from, and reasoning and attention, but there are also 70% of that is inhibitory. So ADHD kids who are basically kind of sleeping in their frontal lobes, they don't have inhibitory actions going on, and so they're hyperactive. And that's why you can give them speed, as in the form of Ritalin. You give them meth in the form of Ritalin or Adderall or something. Right. You wake up the frontal lobes, the theta waves disappear because it wakes up. It applies the brakes to the motor strip, and suddenly they calm down, which is completely counterintuitive to what you would expect. Right. But the same thing is happening with Alzheimer's, with cognitive decline, with dementia, with concussions to some degree. A lot of the same stuff is happening. And most of the time now we've come to recognize anxiety as not a fast brain condition, although it can be, but 3/4 of the time it's a slow brain condition. And we actually have to stimulate the daylights out of them in some cases to settle them down and get them fired back up again and running.
Okay. So
yeah, what?
It's pretty simple.
And slow and fast and all that.
So okay. So we've got, the one lady, we think her Alzheimer's derived from the infections in her mouth. I don't know, Ken, yours, it was hormonal imbalance, and what else?
She did have a head-on car wreck in 2009 and then developed Alzheimer's in 2016. Not exactly 10 years. Right. But
no, that can happen. It's varying times. It's just on average 10 years, but I've seen some people get messed up within a few years. I mean, if you have chronic insomnia, it doesn't take long. And if you have also then if you start abusing substance abuse and the doctors put you on Klonopin for a sleep aid or something like this, or sleeping pills, then you develop tolerance to the sleeping pills, and your insomnia gets worse. And then you develop, often people are
that's what she's lacking.
Okay, so I guess what we need right now is, let's just step by step, how can we help these folks with your device? Is it daily, every other day, once a week?
I like doing it daily, at least for the first 6 weeks or so.
Okay.
Until the brain starts to really get back on track. And I like to do it in the morning when they wake up and get their day in order. Because one of the problems that happens is that when they're so dysfunctional and they're not thinking well, and people are telling them what to do and they can't reason with it, and they're upset about it, they don't have emotional control, then they get all upset about stuff. And when they get all upset, then they go into sort of a flight or fight state, then they get their adrenals all jacked up, and then they're flooded with cortisol, and then they're all wound up with cortisol. And cortisol does hippocampal damage. It shuts down brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which soothes the hippocampus. And so then they develop even more severe memory problems on one hand, but also cortisol damages the medial aspects of the prefrontal lobes, basically right here. And on an EEG, we always see high amplitude, slow alpha, meaning it's just sitting there, idling away. It's not functioning. But the nerves, the networks in that part of the brain feed back to the amygdala. And so you'll see this all the time with people with PTSD, war vets and police and such. They've had so much cortisol in their system, and they've wiped out their the prefrontal lobes. And now all kinds of things set them off. If their kid whines a little bit, they're hitting them. If their wife looks scared, they're hitting them, and they're freaking out over every single little thing. They're so on edge because they can no longer inhibit their fear response. So the more cortisol you have floating in your body, the worse your fear response gets, which then dumps more cortisol, which keeps in that loop, and also impairs memory and keeps dementia rolling at the same time. So there's kind of a double action with the device. One is it's stimulating the brain to function better, but the other thing is it breaks the HPA axis, or the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. That's your flight or fight axis. It breaks that axis extremely effectively. You'll probably notice that people get extremely relaxed when they're on it, and very, very calm and mellow. And you want that. You want to get those adrenals to shut down. Also, adrenals over time, that cortisol starts to cause instabilities in the temporal lobes, and then they start developing paroxysms at night, and they have these giant discharges. We've seen this in so many people with trauma, these massive discharges when they're asleep, and then that's waking them up 100 times a night. So that's the other way you can have insomnia, is by having these little paroxysms. And often when they start to fall asleep, you'll see maybe every few minutes a hand will twitch, or a foot will twitch, or their face will scrunch. And that's a paroxysm getting into the motor strip and firing off a limb a little bit here and there. And that's another form that can definitely happen. It's largely stress related. And the gear usually will resolve that in about a month to 2 months time. It'll just by shutting all that flight or fight stuff down, and then those paroxysms start to settle down. Cortisol goes down as well, and then they start sleeping better. Then they start waking up feeling good and clear-headed. So there's really two of those types of systems, or if you want to call it that, neurological systems that are involved in all kinds of seniors' issues. And they're involved in people who are not even seniors to some degree too, but certainly they really manifest as we age.
So even the insomnia ones, we could do it in the morning and it will help them sleep at night.
If they have that signature, whether they have, either signature, whether it's the really, really, really jacked up adrenals from flight or fight, or whether it's the thalamocortical disconnect, we use it in the morning and they will sleep like a rock, usually the same night. Most of my clients who sleep 3 hours a night, 3 to 4 hours a night, they'll come in here and we'll run them at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. and that night they'll sleep 8 to 10 hours.
Okay, great.
And over time, it becomes just standard after a while. Really make sure their nutrition is up, like their B complex, and vitamin D is critical. But don't use pills for vitamin D, use an oil.
Use an oil?
An oil, a
I haven't
vitamin, yeah,
seen
an
an
oil.
oil.
Vitamin D is fat soluble, and if you don't use the oil, most of the time it never doesn't work at all.
Okay.
And they should take, if they've not taken any vitamin D and they're deficient as can be, then get them on an oil and get them on about 5,000 IU per day for about 4 weeks. But then you got to back it off, or you're going to overdose them on the vitamin D, which will trigger insomnia
Okay.
and other things. So then you got to back them off to about 2,000 IU a day after that.
Okay. But 5,000 IU and 2,000 IU oils, not tablets.
Yeah, not tablets. They're mostly, almost always will be a waste of time. And if ever you see a vitamin D study that discredits vitamin D as junk medicine, or which happens, they're usually comparing against a tablet.
Okay. But B complex, we can do a tablet.
Yes. Yeah, D is fine.
All right.
If you're looking for natural ones, natural factors actually makes a very good B complex, and I take that one myself, and it's made out of herbal concoctions, and it works very, very well.
Okay. All right. So for 6 weeks in the morning, we're going to run them, and we do the happy face booster 1 or 2.
Yeah, and you can also, I would alternate it every other day with the mood booster with the brain booster. That's typically how I do it. I alternate them. Now, and that's usually if they have a component of depression, which a lot of people do once they're seniors. But otherwise, with my younger clients, I often use just the brain booster only.
Okay.
But with seniors, I have a tendency to mix it with both. And you can experiment some and see which one they like best. Doesn't really matter. I normally use I use blue-green lights in the eye sets. Blue on the left, green on the right, to start, because they're pretty sensitive to light most of the time when they have these conditions.
My headset's just white.
Oh, you didn't get the colored ones?
I didn't know. Eric ordered it for me, and what came in is it's glasses with a little viewing port in the middle of them, and it looks like it's just white light that we're getting.
Oh yeah, no, no, you don't want those. Those are view hole eye sets. You don't want those.
So what do I do? Can we add green?
Yeah, we need to get you a pair of multicolor eye sets, and they're opaque. The view hole ones are great for doing cognitive work.
Okay.
Like if you're actually doing stuff and you need to keep in the zone. Now, if you're an athlete and you're running or you're doing something, you can wear those glasses and you can see through them while you're doing stuff. Indy race car drivers were using those things for a long, long time. Dallas Cowboys were running with them.
Oh, wow.
They would run farther, faster, but that's typically for doing cognitive
should
stuff.
I send those back to you and you send me some?
Yeah, I would recommend it. Yeah, we need to get you the multicolor eye sets instead.
All right, Ken, you've got the multicolor ones, right?
Yes, yes.
So we can use his while we're waiting.
Sure.
We can use his while we're waiting. Okay.
Now, if they want to use them while they're reading,
then that's okay.
Then, oh yeah, absolutely. And then they work really well.
Okay.
Like say for cognitive type stuff, if they want to improve their Scrabble game, if they want to, I don't know, doing something that involves them thinking and processing at the time, then those come in real handy. So you still might want to use them for helping people with stroke learn to read. You can kind of keep them. You can run an SMR protocol, which is relaxed attention, and they can practice reading and stuff like this while they're using those eye sets.
All right, is that something that Alzheimer's could do too? Is the SMR stuff?
Oh, absolutely. Oh yeah.
Okay, and
I would still run them with the multicolor probably in the morning or whenever when they wake up. But during the day, if they want to engage in activities, they can certainly wear those other ones. Or if let's say if they go outside and they get really unstable outside, you can literally put a machine in a fanny pack, give them the glasses, and send them outside with the glasses going, and they'll just stay usually quite mellow.
Okay. What is the brain booster? What symbol is that?
A light bulb.
Okay.
Yeah, got it.
Okay, so happy face and the light bulb.
Yeah, I run most of my people on the light bulb number 3 or number 2.
Okay.
We got a fair bit of research on those.
All right, and that's 15, 30 minutes. We'll do that.
Number 3 is 24. What's number 2? It might be 20.
Okay. All right. So somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes, or 20 and 30 minutes.
Yeah, I think number 4, which was is 30 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's just sometimes there's a bit of trial and error that does go on a bit, but for the most part, those are good starting points.
Okay. All right. Ken, do you have any other questions or?
Yeah. So is there a session group that we should kind of avoid for Alzheimer's and cognition problem people?
I wouldn't use the meditation probably. I mean, maybe Healthy Alpha or Wise Guy Alpha, but I wouldn't use anything in the theta section down in that range. Theta, deltas, none of that stuff. Keep it faster.
Okay. Eric said don't use the lightning bolt one too, I remember.
I wouldn't start with that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's probably too much. It's probably too much kick for him.
Yeah, we'll do this the first 6 weeks, the happy face or the brain booster.
Yeah, the brain booster and the mood booster, yeah, and alternate them back and forth. That's a good way to do it.
Okay.
Unless they start telling you they have preferences for one or the other. If they have preferences, then go with their preferences.
How do I order the glasses? Do I just go on your website or something, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, or just call in.
Okay. All right.
I can put you on to Nancy when we're done if you like, and she can
that'd be great.
Get that ordered up for you.
All right. Yeah, we're on the phone still, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
But education, as you know, it sounds like you know, education is really important. So read and watch all my stuff, and that'll get you off to a start. I also have, you'll see the link to the Thalamocortical disconnect. Well, that's in our webinar section, and we got like 15 different lectures in there. The first one is a quick half-hour tutorial on how entrainment works, and if you want to know in much more detail how it works, the second one down is the long version of that. It's an hour long.
Okay. All right. Sounds awesome.
I'll explain more about how it works. It does a lot of stuff. And flashing lights are they're just not flashing lights.
Right.
They do so much stuff. It was originally thought that all they did was affect the frequency of the brain, but the brain would kind of resonate with the frequency of the lights. We've proven over and over that's often doesn't happen. In the case of these guys with the thalamocortical disconnect, we use SMR beta to reestablish alpha. And we're probably doing that through activation of ATP and lactose, because entrainment has been shown to drive up lactose and ATP about 260% in 5 minutes. Wow. And that's key chemicals in the brain. It also calms the whole flight or fight response, settles that down, and there's healing effects from that. It releases non-inflammatory cytokines. It releases heat shock protein, which is an anti-inflammatory in the brain that also helps prevent cancers from forming and stuff like this. There's a fair bit of research on heat shock protein. It's well known in medicine. So it does a bunch of stuff. Increases cerebral blood flow, increases neurotransmitters like serotonin,
great,
endorphins to some degree.
Okay,
yeah, awesome. Does quite a bit.
Great.
All right, more than they thought.
We'll give it a try and let you know. And I got some reading and watching to do. So
yeah, you bet.
The links you sent me has like a website or something with all the videos on it, or haven't?
Well, yeah, they link right to our website.
Okay, great.
And 2 of them are articles.
Okay.
One's the Alzheimer's one that Budzinski and Sherlin published, and the other one is my article on seniors in sort of that has a little synopsis of several studies done. I could send you another link if you want to just look at the physiology of entrainment.
Sure.
See how that works. Photobiomodulation was something else that you probably want to get into as well. I don't make that stuff. But I can get you the info on that stuff.
That'd be great. Yeah, I'd love it. Okay, we'll give it a try. We'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Very much.
All right, thanks, Dave. Are you going to transfer me over or on the phone or how do you?
Oh yeah, you got to no, just phone in. I can't do it off of Zoom. No.
All right,
you'll have to phone in.
All right,
just talk to Nancy. Yeah, just talk to Nancy.
Will do. All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dave.
See you, Eric.